We think journalists are independent, adversarial by nature, tasked to speak truth to power. But in practice, many of the most visible journalists are working within quite tight constraints: legal constraints, social constraints, institutional constraints, ideological constraints, and those constraints are not necessarily enforced on you from above. They're internalized, cultivated. You get rewarded for alignment over time. Access is granted to those who ask the right questions. Your platform is built around your reliability, not to your audience, to your sources. Your career is shaped by trust, not the public's, but the state. Intelligence agencies don't need to control every journalist. Some placements are former military, former intelligence. Others simply cooperate, and for that they get promoted, given access in exchange for their discretion. Before a story appears in a newspaper, it passes through layers of editorial review, maybe even legal review. There's these institutional filters. The reporter lends their name to this illusion of authorship, but framing is originating somewhere in the back. It's coming into the organization through intelligence services, shaped by government policy briefing, and then honed and rewritten and tweaked by editorial staff. Judith Miller's New York Times reporting on Iraq and the WMDs that didn't exist are a textbook example. Her stories in the New York Times cited anonymous intelligence sources and Iraqi defectors, who later turned out to be complete fabrications. But the damage was done. Thanks in part to Judith Miller's reporting, 1 million Iraqis were bombed into oblivion. That is the impact of journalistic framing on the reality of war. She faced no criminal penalties for that, and her sources remain protected. New York Times editors defended the process. British press-state coordination relies less on spectacle and more on background consensus. Oxbridge networks, public school contacts, and security clearance processes create the architecture of loyalty to the British Empire. The BBC has historically worked very closely with MI5 and MI6, not just through direct orders, but this shared worldview. During the Cold War, MI5 vetted BBC editorial staff, and Reuters journalists received payments from the British state. The Information Research Department fed talking points to journalists, and more recently, the Integrity Initiative used Foreign Office money to build a cross-border cluster of aligned journalists and academics who promoted UK foreign policy narratives under the banner of fighting disinformation. When it was exposed, the defence was not denial, it was silence, which speaks louder. Rafi Berg is the BBC's Middle East editor, and he has become a symbol of the blurred line between media and state. He worked first for the CIA's Foreign Broadcast Information Service, an organisation explicitly tasked with shaping global narratives. He developed close ties with Mossad officials and even wrote a book that was praised by former Mossad director Ephraim Halevi. He now still controls BBC framing of the Israel-Palestine coverage. Multiple BBC journalists have accused him of downplaying the substantial violence by Israel, but his edits are often final. Stories that deviate from the approved line are either softened, delayed, or killed. That is embedded intelligence influence being legitimized by this man's job title. He's a criminal. Media institutions do not take journalists in because they're good journalists that are independent and sworn to the truth. In fact, no way. You're chosen for interview at these establishments based on who your contacts are. Can you be trusted?